What's up, folks? Today I'm going to try something interesting with our 2026 Senate map, and I'm going to take the most recent poll out of the state according to the 50+1 polling aggregate and shift it by its mean reverted bias according to Nate Silver. And we will do that and see how the map shakes out. Massachusetts. The newest poll here from Survey USA has Ed Merkley ahead of a generic Republican challenger, I'm pretty sure, by 25 points. Survey USA has a mean reverted bias of 0.09 towards the Democratic Party, so that is still very much safe Democratic territory in Massachusetts. Next up is Idaho, where the most recent poll from Change Research has the Republican incumbent in the state up 25 points. Change Research has a mean reverted bias, according to Nate Silver, of minus 2.68. That's more for the Republicans, way past the 15-point margin for safe, so that is safe Republican. Down in Florida, appointed U.S. Senator Ashley Moody, according to North Florida University, is ahead by 11 points. North Florida University has a mean reverted bias of minus 1.58. That's 12.58 for the Republicans and likely Republican margin. In North Carolina, former Governor Roy Cooper is favored by 9 points over former RNC Chair Michael Whatley, according to Harper Polling, which has a mean reverted bias of that minus 0.39. So that's 8.61 for Roy Cooper, which is likely Democratic margin. In Virginia, incumbent U.S. Senator Mark Warner is favored by 7 points if now almost former Governor Glenn Youngkin were to enter the race, according to Virginia Commonwealth University, who has a mean reverted bias of minus 0.05, making this almost the exact same likely Democratic margin. In Iowa, although the public policy polling poll that was conducted here was Josh Turek versus Joni Ernst, and Joni Ernst is retiring. We're all going to die.
People are not, well, we all are going to die.
If we assume that Ashley Hinson, the likely Republican nominee in my head, it performs similar, which she probably will, public policy polling minus 0.88. That's 4.88 points to the Republican Party, which is a lean Republican margin. Heading over to Maine now, if we assume that Graham Plattner will win the Democratic primary, which I still think he will, and recent polling has backed it up, Maine's People's Resource Institute has Graham Plattner up 4 points over incumbent Susan Collins, and they have mean reverted bias minus 0.1, that's 3.9 for the Democrats, or lean Democrat margin. In Ohio, we have an interesting story with Sherrod Brown, Heart Research Association, or institution, or whatever it is. They have Sherrod Brown up 3 points, and they have a mean reverted bias of 0.85, making this 2.15 points ahead for the Democrats, which again is still in the margin of error. All of this is in the margin of error, but that's a lean Democratic margin for former Senator Sherrod Brown making a comeback bid. In New Hampshire, Pappas is up 3 points against Sununu in the coefficient poll, but coefficient does have a mean reverted bias of 2.23 for the Republican Party, making this 5.23 for the Democrats, or a likely Democratic margin. In Michigan, we have a very crowded Democratic primary field going up against the last Republican nominee for the Senate in 2024, Mike Rogers. Most recent poll has Haley Stevens, who is kind of the front runner by about 5 points, but nonetheless having a 2-point lead over Mike Rogers. That pollster has a mean reverted bias of negative 0.22, which makes this 1.78 points for the Democrats, or a lean Democrat margin. In Texas, we have a very interesting race here. Polling has James Tallarico in the Democratic primary up 8 against Colin Allred. I'm going to assume James Tallarico wins. I don't think Texas Democratic primary voters are going to vote for Colin Allred again when he already ran in 2024. But Texas at Tyler University has James Tallarico behind Ken Paxton by 1 point. He is behind Ken Paxton and John Cornyn by 1 point. They have a mean reverted bias of negative 0.77, making this 1.77 points for the Republicans, or a lean Republican margin. All right, we're getting into the tilts now. In Alaska, Data for Progress has Mary Peltola, if she were to run for Senate, against Dan Sullivan, ahead by 1 point. But they have a mean reverted bias of minus 1.59, which actually goes 0.59 points for Dan Sullivan, making this tilt Republican. Probably our most interesting race in Nebraska here. Lake Research Partners actually have Dan Osborne leading by 1 against incumbent Senator Pete Ricketts, a Republican in a state Trump won by 20.5 points last year in 2024. Lake Research Partners does have a mean reverted bias of 0.65 for the Democrats, but since Dan Osborne is an independent, it's kind of hard to apply it, but assuming that we calculate him as a Democrat because he's running against a Republican, and all Democrats are going to vote for him, that still gives Dan Osborne a 0.35 point edge in that one poll adjusted for bias, which means that we actually need and add in tilt Dan Osborne. In Georgia, incumbent Democrat Jon Ossoff versus presumed by 10-point, probably still toss-up primary Republican nominee Mike Collins. He leads by literally a singular respondent in Qantas Insights. But Qantas Insights does have a mean reverted bias of 0.96 for the Republicans, so that goes to a 1.04 margin for Jon Ossoff, which is a lean Democratic margin. All right, thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing. This is actually quite an interesting map because neither party has the majority, because Democrats would need 51 for a majority because of J.D. Vance. This would be certainly one of the most interesting Senates we've seen in a while, but always remember to politic.